I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Abstract Essay, where ideas take shape, thoughts find depth, and every conversation explores the art of thinking beyond the obvious. And today I have my special guest. She's the author of the book, The Sculptor and the Saint, no other than Miss Lori Joan Swick. Welcome, welcome,
Hi.
welcome, welcome, Miss Lori. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I missed?
Thank you, Daniel. It's always a pleasure to visit with you. My doctorate is in philosophy and religion. I write books about women whose agency in the world's spiritual traditions I feel like has been overlooked and not given the credit that it's due. And I'm here to talk with you today about the process of doing that.
Indeed, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And hoping for more and more empowering books like this to come, Miss Lori. And today, yes, writing process of your books. Your novels often delve into a deep history and spiritual themes. What is the spark for you? Is it a specific historical figure, an artifact, or philosophical question, or something else entirely?
Well, different things throughout doing research. I teach a lot of religion classes. I teach classes about women in religion and world culture. And as I teach and I write and I learn, I come across different women who I think have done extraordinary things. And my method is to, first of all, if I find somebody I'm interested in writing about, of course, I just look and exhaustively read what's out there readily to the public and what is known about them. And then I go back and do scholarly research. Since I teach for universities, I have access to academic libraries. So I'm able to find out if there's been any new evidence about not necessarily just this person, but about the time that they lived in, about the culture that they lived in. Archaeologists and anthropologists lately can date things that they find so accurately. They can tell more and more and more about what was going on in cultures in the past, or in earlier centuries. So the next thing I do is a pretty exhaustive search and see if there's anything new about what was going on then that I might be able to couple with what we know about them, just in the popular sense. And then things start to happen, things occur. I get ideas. When you put these things together, you start to see patterns and you can start to trace what their life might have really been like. So that's my process and sort of the spark that gets me going and researching. And I'm a total nerd. I love research. I do a lot of it. But it's like detective work for me. It's like really fun, gratifying, solving a mystery detective work.
Miss Laurie, when writing about historical religious figures or movements, how do you navigate the tension between documented fact and imaginative leaps required for fiction?
Oh, that's such a good question, Daniel. And I wish I had just one good answer for you because it's a trick, but that's part of the fun. Once I go through and I find basically what I want to say about this person, then I go through. I'm a plotter, not a pantser. They call it when you're writing fiction. Plotters outline and have a real process. Pantsers just kind of go by the seat of their pants and make it up as they go along. Since I'm talking about women, most of whom are actual figures, I plotted into a fiction style rise and fall, climax, denouement, sort of an outline, and work with it from there. Of course, it moves and changes from that point on. But how staying true is very important to me, especially if I'm talking about a real person. To stay true to what their life was like, and when that's my main purpose in writing is what their life was really like and what they really did, and sharing that with the world, but doing that in a way that's entertaining from a fiction standpoint. And it depends on how much we know about this person. For example, Saint Cecilia, the saint that's highlighted in the Sculptor and the Saint, lived in ancient Rome, and a lot of flowery things were written about her life, and how she was married off to a beautiful young man, and happily ever after love, and she kept her virginity intact because she was in love with Jesus, and he was fine with all that. So you go through and you look at these stories as they've been presented to us through history, through a certain agenda, if you will, and then you go back and research what was really going on at this time. So I found out that we know that from like funerary sites, the statues of families that were sculpted and were left by these families' cemeteries. Usually there was a very old man with a very young, almost a girl, as his wife. So from that we can kind of infer that women of rank at that time were married off to much older men. When their wives died, they would marry young girls as soon as they were old enough to bear children. So little things like this, when you go back and dig up history and then you compare it to what's being said, you start to get a real picture of what their life might have really been like. And that's what I do.
Interesting, Miss Lori. Do you or do your protagonists' voices come to you full form? Or do you discover their personalities and motivations gradually as you research and write?
I think in order to write well, you have to have a really good idea from the start what that personality is like. And as I'm doing my research and this depth of research, I start to hear them talk to me. And then when I write, of course, you have to become that person. And then I allow them to talk through me. But once character is established and I have the help of history, once you get a good character going, they kind of help you write the story. They do what they're going to do. Uh, it's like you're writing it with them, if you will. Does that make sense?
Makes sense, Miss Jody. Makes sense. Your settings like ancient temples or medieval monasteries feel like characters themselves. How do you go about reaching and then authentically recreating these sacred spaces in a way that feels immersive but not like a textbook?
Well, for this particular book, The Sculptor and the Saint, I actually went to Rome twice. And once, when the book was just a thought in my mind. And then after I had written it and really almost completely done with it, I went back and went to these places and just immersed myself in the power of them. And that really helped. My next book coming out next year, the Snake Priestess, I went to Knossos in Crete and spent time where this person would have spent time. And just really the best thing is to be there, and it's good to be there after you've done a lot of writing and you've immersed yourself in it, because you know more what you're looking for. You know more about this person and what they would have done. You know more about like how they would have felt. So then you can go back and kind of have the real experience of what their life would have been like, and then go back and write it and do a final revision, sort of in the way you feel like you're really honoring them and you're being them. You really have to step into their mind, into their bodies, into their shoes, into their lives. So
Hmm.
there's nothing like being there.
Definitely. On craft and technique, Miss Laurie, the journey of spiritual awakening is not always linear. How do you approach the narrative structure of your novel to reflect the often internal, transformative arcs of your characters?
Well, I do a lot of writing in first person. In The Sculptor and the Saint, Cecilia's in third person, so we're kind of looking down on her. But Stefano, who sculpts her in the 16th century, writes in first person. And he's writing his experiences as he's learning about her and getting to know her. So that really helps. In my next book coming out, The Snake Priestess, it's in first person. So we're really in her mind. She's a snake priestess, and I'm trying to show her relationship with the goddess at that time. It would have been key. It would have been intense. But writing it in first person so that we're actually in her mind, helps me to convey that. and to help my reader get into her head besides just myself getting into her head.
Miss Lori, writing dialogue for characters from a different millennium is a unique challenge. How do you make their speech feel authentic to their time while still being accessible and relatable to a modern reader?
Oh, that's a really good question too, because if you get too involved in ancient dialogue, it's very hard for anybody to read. Um, Reading a lot how they wrote at that time, how they would have expressed themselves. Of course, a lot of times, like for Cecilia and my next book, The Snake Priestess, they would have been speaking a totally different language, and that's something else to consider. But reading the translations and even the original documents of, say, that were written in ancient Crete. There is a document about a high priestess from this part of the world. It was a little earlier in time, but it was very similar. And reading her poetry and her poems, there's certain things you can use to make the tone appropriate for your character and your dialogue at your time. For example, in the ancient world, in this book about Enheduanna, who was the high priest of Inanna, when she really wants to emphasize something, she says it, she repeats it 3 times. So, if it's short sentences repeated 3 times. I did that throughout the novel, The Snake Priestess, which helped me get the tone. More short sentences, usually you vary sentence length, but to get the tone and to get the feel of being at that time, more straight to the point sentences. You really have to use technique to try to do that. But once you get into it and you do enough research, finding the actual tone isn't hard. As you say, it can be tricked, making it accessible to the modern reader, and that's something that you have to just keep working with. And I, of course, have beta readers read it. I ask other people to read it and say, "Am I losing you here?" Or, do you know what's going on with this dialogue? And when you're immersed in it yourself, it's kind of harder to see. So I have other people who have read a lot and know a lot about books and about the type of thing I'm writing, who read it for me and give me feedback on whether or not they feel like it's easily readable.
Easily readable for sure for modern readers. You frequently intertwine multiple storytelling lines or perspective, such as connecting modern character with ancient one. What does your process look like for braiding these threads together into cohesive whole?
Well, in the Sculptor and the Saint, as I said, I wrote much of the book in the 16th century. Young Stefano Maderno, who sculpted her, I wrote it from his perspective as he's working on her. And so as he's learning about what happened in her life, then I can go back and juxtapose what I think really happened in her life with that particular thing. So, for example, when he's reading about her marriage to Valerian, what Stefano's learning about that in the 16th century, I think, is quite a bit different than what really happened to her. So having him, you know, read what's going on, what has been recorded about her, what the church believes about and teaches about her, and then going back in her time and saying what I think really happened to her really shows how history is telescoped and how we're looking at this person in ancient history, and it might not be what their life was really like. And I think this happened a lot to women in patriarchal cultures. They came through being what we needed them to be for a certain reason, and we didn't really honor who they really were and what they really went through.
Miss Lori, on the personal and spiritual journey, is your writing process itself a form of a spiritual practice or meditation for you? If so, how does manifest in your daily routine?
Thank you so much for asking that question. It is a very spiritual process for me. I like candles. It's like prayer. It's like a temple session. It's at the very best, it's supercharged for me. I like to get up first thing in the morning, when it's still dark, make my coffee before the phone starts ringing, before I look at my emails, before anything else starts going around and moving around. And I just kind of get in my zone, and I, listen to the right music. I listen to, ambient type music that relates to what I'm writing. Like, as I say, I like candles, and I just make it sort of a sacred, special time. and it's very healing for me. It's very meditative, as you say. And I have a real sense of purpose with this. I have a real sense of mission. So it's kind of like me taking, the gifts I've been given with my education, with what I've been privileged to learn, and to find ways to share it with the world in a meaningful and entertaining way.
Having now written several novels exploring profound spiritual themes, how has the process of writing them changed your own personal belief or worldview?
Oh, that's also. I'm just going to keep saying this good question because you're just asking such good questions. But um,
Thank you.
I always, every one of them, when I get in the perspective of what this woman's um, attitude towards God would have been, how that
Yes.
made her feel about herself. It opens me to new ideas about, what is God really? Is God a man? Is God a goddess? Is God an energy? Is God a being? That's always just a question that's just worth, you know, we could think forever and have fun with that one. But every new mindset about what God is and the relationship we have with whatever we consider to be God or the divine or the other or the metaphysical opens new vistas. Aside from the snake priestess, that priestesses, as it came out and as I researched it, her relationship with the goddess was totally different, very powerful, very wonderful in a totally different way. The next book that I'm starting to research and write is about Helena Blavatsky of Russia, who she really brought occultism to the West. Amazing person. But her view on God is so different, so far out there. Her a view on they believe that she could bilocate. She could be in one place and send her spirit or her mind to another. She could see things we can't see. She could communicate with the energy of people in the room who had lived there before. Fascinating person. When I look at her theology, when I look at her theosophy, when I look at her philosophy of life and how it all works together, it's mind boggling. I mean, it just opens new vistas. So it's always like a new spiritual trip, if you will, or a journey. And because I love philosophy too, it just gives me new ways to think about what's real, who we are, why we're here, those existential questions in life that we all ask, the big questions, if you will. Who am I? Why am I here? Who made me? Why did he or she make me? What is my purpose? What happens to me and my loved ones after we die? Every one of these characters whose mind I try to step into and experience life and their spirituality through them opens my vistas in so many ways.
When fictionalizing the lives of revered historical or spiritual figures, do you feel a sense of responsibility that is particularly heavy?
I do feel a sense of responsibility. I won't say it's terribly heavy because I do feel like I work until I've honored this person the way they deserve to be honored. And if there's any questions I have in my mind that of some little invention or some little twist I might have done for the sake of fiction, I will put it in an author's note in the back because I want to be very transparent about what we do and we don't know about this person, and what came out of my mind and what might have been real, because I feel like I owe that person, but to my reader. So I just have a real sense of mission about telling their true stories,
Mhm.
to the fullest extent as is possible.
Miss Laurie, many writers struggle with the saggy middle of a novel. What is your strategy for maintaining narrative tension and your own creative energy through the longest part of writing journey?
Um, I feel like if I understand your question, I feel like as I'm writing, I have a real sense of responsibility to who I'm writing about, but I also have a sense of responsibility to my reader to keep it entertaining, and connecting those dots. It is sometimes easy, sometimes not. Sometimes you have to guess. For example, the next book I have coming out, The Snake Priestess, I'm kind of drawing on a figure, if you will, and not a necessary definite person. And there's so much we don't know about that civilization that I had a lot more room to wander freely through that narrative, But I still believe I need to base it on as much research as I can about what really would have happened at that time. Now, Helena Blavatsky, the next novel I intend to write, because this woman's amazing and everybody needs to know about her. But she wrote extensively herself, and it's very esoteric. She wrote in code. I mean, it's not easy to decipher what's going on in it. There's been a lot written about her. No historical novels that I've been able to find, but it's the other end of the spectrum. There's so much out there about her that just, I'm having to, instead of connect dots and build bridges, I'm having to narrow down what to focus on and what's important and what's not, and how to work that into a novel outline, if you will, which is I've got some definite ideas about it, and it's a definite work in process, but it's a totally different experience, of turning, a real person into a novel, and what I want to highlight with it, and the mysteries. I think all my novels, the women in them, there's an underlying mystery of what was their life really like. It was this, what really led to this, what really happened. And so, just letting that speak to me as my research continues. But it's a totally different research process. It's a totally different writing process. I hope I answered your question.
Indeed, Miss Lori. On the reader and the big picture, what is the primary feeling or thought you hope a reader carries with them after finishing one of your books?
Well, I hope they learn something. I hope they learn something about history, about women in history, but most of all, I hope they learn something about themselves from this women in history, and what I feel like each particular one has to share with the world. So I hope they feel inspired to learn more about women in history and what really happened to them, because I think in most cases, even like historical figures that a lot have been written about, we don't know the whole truth about them, of what their lives were like. And I think it's important, Daniel, because even if it's not the heroine story we want to read, I think women in their real lives, we don't really get a chance to appreciate the changes that we go through. It's all kept kind of hush hush. But I think going back and seeing what their real lives are probably really like, and getting that perspective throughout history of, how women lived, before we had contraceptives that we do today, women just pumped out babies, we don't stop and think about what that was like, and I think it's really important to go back at these different times of history and see what women's lives were really like, and see how certain women, even within the face of this, were incredible spiritual leaders, were incredible spiritual thinkers and initiators. And most of them, because they were women, just really didn't get the credit for that I feel like they deserved. So I hope that going back and seeing that will help women today. It will enrich their own sense of spirituality, their own sense of being able to create what they need spiritually for themselves, and to get it, from certain places. I think that's really important for people to be whole people, to be able to define their own relationship with divinity and how they want to express that. So I think after all of the walking around that and talking around that, that's probably the pith of what I would like to accomplish for my reader.
Yes, for sure, Miss Laurie. Beyond telling a compelling story, what is the deeper work you hope your writing accomplishes in the world?
Well, I really hope that it gives women, all people, men and women, but women especially, a sense of more of a deeper heritage and religion than we realize that we have. And because of that they, will have the chances to create religious systems that work for them and for their particular needs. And much more could be said about that, but without going off the deep end of that, I love writing. I love the writing process. I love, making it literary and trying to make it beautiful. I just love writing. And so I hope people get a chance to appreciate the art of writing. through reading my books.
Miss Lori, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please to listen to my other podcast, people, my other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in 5th season, abstract poetry in 2nd season, and my book 101 review in 5th season too, comedy 101 in 2nd season, and my food 101 in 5th season as well, geography 101 in 4th season, and my baby podcast, Law 101 and Mental Health 101, Love Letters in 3rd season, and Movie 101 review and Music 101 in 4th season, and Science 101 and Sex 101 in its 1st season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Miss Lori, can you give us a glimpse into what historical period, spiritual question, or forgotten voice you are being drawn for your next project?
Oh, my next project will be in the 19th century, Helena Blavatsky. And yeah, that's about all I'm going to say about that. She lived between from the late 1800s, early 1900s, and so it's totally a different time in history. It's sort of a more Victorian, no, even before Victorian, sort of a later time in history. So
no spoilers.
Yeah, I have a lot more research to do.
Okay. Miss Lori Joan Swick, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. I'm hoping for more and more empowering books like this to come. So can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, so where do people can buy your books, Miss
Oh, they're
Lori?
at Amazon.com. You can get them through Barnes & Noble, a lot of bookstores. You can visit my website and go through the links there at lorijoanswick.com. Check out my video blogs, too, about women in history.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Lori Joan Swick, because if you support her, pursue more and more empowering books like this to come. So, Miss Lori, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel.
Martyrdom, people, see you soon.